Let's get to some audience questions. First one is from Molly. Hey, David, what Republican Party policies have actually changed as a result of Donald Trump, either formally or implicitly? I think that last part, formally or implicitly, is a key part. So, number one, and my mind immediately goes to this, we know that at the urging of Paul Manafort and others, days before the Republican National Convention, at which Donald Trump would be crowned the official nominee of the Republican Party for the 2016 presidential election, the Republican Party platform, when it comes to Russia and Ukraine, was changed. And it was softened towards Russia, and it took on a more, not anti-Ukraine position, but sort of a more indifferent to what Russia is doing in Ukraine position. So that's number one. Number two, this is more implicit, but Trump has sort of at least talked differently about infrastructure and kind of trade as well. And it hasn't really formally changed the position of the Republican Party. And my guess is that if we eventually get back to a sort of normal Republican, or I guess the sort of Republicans we've seen over the last 15 years, that they are not going to be big on infrastructure spending like Donald Trump has been, even though, again, Trump's version of infrastructure spending is a very, very crony capitalist handouts. They are not going to, I would guess, be all about threatening and enacting tariffs on steel and aluminum from both from allies and countries that we are engaged in trade agreements with. So I think that those are more implicit ways in which the Republican Party has kind of stood aside and said, hey, he's the Republican and we'll sort of work it out. Not formal changes to policy. I think the biggest way in which Donald Trump has de facto changed the Republican Party is the idea of the moral high ground, right? Because we have in the Republican Party a party that is much more heavily religious than the Democratic Party. The most extreme religious elements of American society tend to vote Republican if they vote at all, evangelicals being one of those groups. And they wanted to claim the moral high ground for a very long time. And they still are sort of trying to claim it with Donald Trump, but not credibly so, right? The guy who's had the affairs, the guy whose wife has posed nude, the guy who talked about grab him by the you-know-what, the guy who, I mean, became anti-abortion when he was like 68 years old after a full life of being in favor of a woman's right to choose. So I think that in an unofficial capacity, the way that Donald Trump has most changed the Republican Party is that they no longer can even really claim the moral high ground. And that actually is not just something to throw in their faces and say you're hypocrites. That actually may allow really, really horrible and depraved candidates in the future to do well in the Republican Party, because they'll say, hey, you know what? We are on board with these views of his or those views of hers, and we can ignore the moral depravity. And I think it sets a very, very dangerous precedent.
Right. Well, really, they were never able to claim the moral high ground. They just did anyway.
Ostensibly, they attempted to.
Yeah, but when it comes to policy, I can't think of anything post-Trump that will change in the Republican Party platform. I think everyone just identifies Trump as an anomaly. I mean, he wasn't really a Republican, and he just decided to run on their party ticket. So I don't think anything will change going forward.
What about when it comes to international diplomacy? Like it's not policy, but because of how Trump has dealt in this sort of childish, petulant child way with the leaders of other countries through Twitter, it's not an official change to Republican Party policy, but my guess is that other Republicans and future Republicans will feel like it's okay to sort of do diplomacy in this totally non-diplomatic, haphazard way that Trump has done it.
Well, it's interesting. So if we had a Democratic president elected in 2020 and then maybe a Republican one again in 2024, do you think China would see the election of another Republican president and think, oh, here come the tweets now? I don't think they'll make that connection.
No, probably not. It would depend on who it is. But I just worry that the party would ignore just another wacky candidate because they would say, hey, we survived Trump and here are like 3 things he did that we like or something like that. Tax cuts, but it's more or less similar to what we've seen, and that's what they latch onto, right? They say, hey, his tax cut bill was it's what Republicans like to do, so we can ignore all the other stuff.